Good evening. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas, bienvenides. A huge welcome to the British Library. My name's B. Rowlett. I work in the cultural events team, and I would be remiss not to tell you about another amazing event that we've got coming up. You've all got a programme on your chairs for the European Writers' Festival. Please come back for that because it's going to be amazing. Yes, I've got one person signed up already. Thank you. In the meantime, you're in for a real treat tonight because we're here because we love everything Hispanic and we love writers. So this is the sweet spot. I would like you to give a huge applause to my dear colleague, Rosie, who's brought this whole thing together, and she's going to take it from here. Cheers, Rosie. I forgot to mention Housemans. I always forget something.
I'll do some. Welcome, everyone, and I hope you've all got your copies. Free, but if you want to pass me a tenner, I'd very happily take it, but they are free. So thank you to B, and thank you to the British Library. We're always so happy to be here. And the last time we were in this space was when we launched the German Riveter, so a few years ago, and it is my favorite space. It's fantastic. So welcome to our celebration of Spanish literature in English and the launch of our fabulous free magazine, the Spanish Riveter, which is the 12th edition of the Riveter, brought to you by the European Literature Network, and it is truly unique. It's the very first magazine or book of Spanish contemporary prose and poetry in English. And quite frankly, if I had been able to have a magazine like this when I started off in European literature, I would have been much happier and much more informed, I think. This is the kind of magazine I wish I'd always had. And it's the same with all the magazines we make. Every time I think, oh, I wish I had a magazine of German literature in English. And there wasn't one, so we made one. And then we had the same in Austrian as well, which we launched last week at the British Library, as you know. So I'm the editor-in-chief and director of the European Literature Network. And before we start our gala performances, I'm going to try and move this down because it is a little bit stiff. but it is a bit stiff. Before we start our gala performances of readings and interviews, there are some very important people to thank. From the very beginning, our goal was to include as many of Spain's languages and literatures as possible. Therefore, there are many people to thank. Now, I'm very grateful to the Spanish Embassy in London. There are several embassy members here, and we're really grateful to you for your support and your sponsorship. Now, with us in spirit is Ainhoa Sanchez, literature manager at the Asociación Cultural Española in Madrid. We're also joined in person by the Cervantes Institute London. You know who you are. We're very grateful to you for so many things. We're joined by the Institute Ramon Llull, our Catalan friends. You know who you are. We're so grateful. And the Junta de Galicia, not here in person, but they are here in their literature, and Etxepare, the Basque Institute of Culture as well. Now, very importantly, thanks to the creators of the magazine, otherwise known as the Riveters. And if you know the story of Rosie the Riveter, you'll know why that name is so important. Huge thanks to our editor, West Camel, to our editorial assistant, Alice Banks, design and production, Ana Blajak, the cover illustrator, the fantastic Spanish artist, Ana Galvan, and to our business manager, Max Easterman, otherwise known as my long-suffering husband. And lurking at the back is our videographer, Mihai Andre, who we're very glad to welcome back to the British Library, who's filming tonight so that you can see all this and listen to the interviews and the readings again and again and again. Now, let those trumpets blare, because just in case you think I've forgotten her, finally, I'd like to introduce you to tonight's hostess with the mostess, Katie Whittemore, translator, specialist in Spanish literature, and the magazine's guest editor. Now, Katie's going to lead you through the evening, introduce you to our readers and the interviews, our special guests. And at the very end, I'd love you to buy books, I'd love you to chat and to meet the authors. Okay, so enjoy the show. Thank you, Katie.
Well, thank you so much, Rosie, and thank you all for coming. I have just an amazing lineup of guests for tonight. And my first guest is Robert Elms. Robert, would you come join me, please? Yes. No, come sit for a moment. Yes. So Robert Elms is a writer and a broadcaster and a Sony Award-winning radio show host for BBC London. He is a former columnist for NME and The Face and author of Spain, A Portrait After the General, an account of Spanish history, culture, and politics, and The Way We Wore, a book about fashion's relationship with music and youth culture. But more importantly, for me at least, Robert is a deep lover of Spain, of Spanish culture, Spanish literature, Spanish food, I assume, and has spent a great deal of time in the country. Tonight, he's going to share with us some of his thoughts on that beloved place. And I do have a little quote from your feature in The Riveter that I think I would like to share with the folks. Robert, you say that Spain's compelling, sometimes dark, and always mesmerizing soul is with you. Now tell us how you really feel about Spain. Yes, would you like to stand?
I'll stand.
Yes, please.
Thank you very, very much. I first went to Spain when I was 16, and I last went to Spain 4 days ago. I came back. And 4 days ago, I was in my pueblo. I've been lucky enough for the last 23 years to have a house in a town called Vejer de la Frontera, down in the Provincia de Cádiz. And it so happened that on Thursday evening, it was the first night of feria. Now, any of you who've ever been to an Andaluz feria will know the scene. There was a very gaudy and very noisy fun fair. There were lights everywhere. There was sherry flowing in all directions as fast as the Guadalquivir. There were women in very traditional traje, some of them with mantillas in their hair. There were men wearing traje corto and Cordobés hats. It was the most traditional scene imaginable. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was dancing Sevillanas very badly. But I was dancing in the LGBTQ plus caseta in Vejer de la Frontera, which was the place to be. And that struck me as absolutely indicative of what's been so extraordinary about the Spain that I've lived through. That on the one hand, this was a scene that might not have changed for 200 years. And yet on the other hand, it was a scene that 30 years ago, 40 years ago, was unimaginable. And Spain had pulled off this incredible trick of not changing at all, still being thoroughly Spanish, and yet changing completely. And that's been an extraordinary thing to watch. As I say, I first went to Spain in 1975, September 1975. I was 16, I'd just done what were then called my O-levels, and I went on a holiday to the cheapest place I could find with 4 friends from school. To be honest, my 2 aims were to get very drunk and try and lose my virginity. And I succeeded in only one of those. And it so happened that I arrived a matter of weeks before General Francisco Franco finally agreed to die. And so the Spain that I've known since then has been entirely the Spain since the shroud of Francoism was pulled away. And it's just been wonderful to watch this land come back to life. I didn't go back to Spain after that for many years. I was sitting in my mother's house in 1981 watching the television when Colonel Antonio Tejero walked into the Cortes with his ridiculous tricorn hat and his gun. And I really thought I might have to go off and fight in the next Spanish Civil War. At that stage, I was a lefty student at the LSE. I came from a very much a socialist family, and I really wondered whether I'd look good in a beret and whether I had the heart to defend the Ebro. Thankfully, it didn't come to that. And thankfully, Spain saw through that transition to democracy fantastically well. And when we're on the subject, Javier Cercas's book, Anatomy of a Moment, about that moment, is one of the most extraordinary pieces of writing that I've consumed in the last few years. But finally, it did come my time to go back. In 1985, fleeing a lost love affair over here, I decided that I would move to Barcelona. This was the time of La Movida. So I spent 18 months in Barcelona, and I think I slept for about 18 hours in total. This was a city at that stage in a country which just did not go to sleep because it was having a party. And what a party Spain can have. There was this extraordinary outpouring of creativity, of excitement. I lived in Barcelona, but I also spent quite a lot of time in Madrid. And there was just a competition between the two, not just their famously rivaled football teams, but who could stay up later, who could be more outrageous, who could go to more clubs and more parties. And it was a fantastic time to be in Spain. But when I first moved to Barcelona, this is how ignorant I was. Although I'd fallen in love with Spain and I'd done my reading and I'd done my research, I didn't even know that Catalan was a separate language. I'd gone there to learn to speak the language and got completely mixed up with dos quarts menos deo. And really I was learning two languages simultaneously because both languages were being spoken again on the streets of Barcelona. And that's one of the changes we've seen. The way that the regions of Spain have come back to life, have reclaimed their languages, the fact that Euskera is so important up in the Basque country, that we have fantastic literature in Gallego. We may be getting Asturianas recognized as an official language. That's been an incredible thing of this country coming back to life. The culture of this land, the culture of Almodóvar, the culture of fantastic movies, brilliant actors who've gone on to take the world stage. The way as well that something like religion plays a totally different role, it seems to me, in Spain now. I love being in Sevilla in Semana Santa. There's nothing to equal that. The religiosity, the generosity, the pain and the joy that goes with those processions. And yet I know that those people are going to be naked on the beach down near where I am in Cadiz a few weeks later. That Catholicism now plays a very different role in Spain. That it's now a Catholicism of inclusion, of fantastic events, rather than a Catholicism that tells you can't do that. Morality has changed incredibly. Women have claimed their rightful role in this new Spain. I mean, the rise of feminism and the power of Spanish women has been phenomenal. There has been a commercialization, there has been a more materialistic Spain emerging, but you don't have to go far. You have to wander off into the hills of La Mancha, or go to baking Extremadura. Go down to Cadiz on an autumn day and see the eagles fly overhead. Hear Cante Hondo in the hot winds that blow in from the Sahara. And there is still this extraordinary Spain out there. It's this Spain that has enchanted me all of my life. It's this Spain that has been, apart from the wife I love, who is on her way back from Spain as we speak, has been the great love affair of my life. And for that, I can only thank this open, welcoming, encouraging, occasionally difficult, always, always, always sleepless Spain. Thank you very, very much. Muchísimas gracias y besos y abrazos, eh?
My next guest is Juan Cruz. Juan? Juan is an award-winning Spanish author, journalist, editor, and the co-founder of El País newspaper. In 2012, he was awarded the National Award for Cultural Journalism from the Spanish Ministry of Education, Culture, and Sport. His body of work includes over 40 books, among them works of fiction, poetry, essay, and journalism. Juan, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Very glad to see you. So Juan has been in the Spanish cultural socio-political scene for decades now. And Robert Elms has just made reference to the enormous changes that Spain has seen over the last decades, mostly since the transition. And I was wondering if you might talk to us a little bit about your experience, specifically with Spanish literature, over, say, the last 40 years or so, some of the changes, some of the trends that you've seen in your role as an editor and as a writer.
Yeah, well, I have been like an English person during some years of my life, because with transition was born El País, and the first correspondent of El País was myself.
Yes.
In London. For us, England was always a place to look at as journalists and also as Democrats.
Yes.
Because England was, for us, a place to be regarded.
Yes,
as
a reference point.
A reference. Now we are in the common Europe. Sadly, England is not there.
Yeah.
But for us, England was a place to be in when we were adolescents or young. Now Spain is still a place that needs to look at England, to look at other countries, because we are a young democracy.
Yes.
That young democracy leaves literature as something like a school.
Yes, I was going to say a training ground. It's sort of the...
And, well, you have here some writers, especially Rosa Montero, who has been a master in journalism and now a master in the writing and also in provoking writers, the young writers. That is very good because people need reference. We have many references,
Yes.
American and Spanish, to be regarding what is today our obligation as readers,
Yes.
and our obligation also as journalists. I am a journalist, I'm also a writer, and I write many interviews with Spanish and American writers, and I'm very glad to notice that the boom has survivors.
Yes.
And the only survivor of that boom was Mario Vargas Llosa. But there are a lot of people from America, from Spain,
Yes.
who are cultivating the fact that we are the heirs of many, many writers that without them we are nothing.
No.
Because the reference is literature.
And I just want to mention for those in the audience that when you say Spanish and American writers, the American writers you're referring to are not my American type of writers, but we're talking about Spanish American writers, Hispanic American writers,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
And
you have there Juan Gabriel Vázquez,
yes.
Carolina Bello. You have many, many writers in Mexico, in Uruguay, in Argentina, mostly women.
Yes.
And this is a new boom that should be regarded as a continuation of those who have great names.
Yes.
Like
Garcia-
Mario Vargas Llosa or Garcia Marquez or Julio Cortázar. But now women
Yes.
are being the great promises
Yes, and
of
they're-
Spanish language future.
And they're being quite widely translated into English as well, both by UK and US presses. Now, something that you wrote in your feature on the Latin American boom for the magazine that struck me as so interesting that maybe you could comment on is that there was not always such a fluid exchange of literatures and ideas between Spain and other Spanish-speaking countries, that those connections, you referenced the festivals, the Hay Festival,
Yeah.
and that there was
The festival of Guadalajara, Mexico, is
The book fair.
vital for that new boom.
Yes.
That now combine Spanish and American, South American and Mexican writers. And this is very important. And you are doing something that we should do also in Spanish. Why don't we don't have our own riveter?
Yes, that's a very good question.
Yeah, because we need
Yes.
to feel together.
Yes.
The togetherness of the boom. And now the boom is Spanish and American boom.
Yes.
And I think you are investing in that new way of doing literature of both sides.
Yes.
And Spain has a lot of learning to the American and South American writers. And I think the way that is being done is very mean in Spanish terms. We have to embrace
Yes.
our friends, our writers in Latin America.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Juan.
Thank you to
That's
you.
wonderful. You can read Juan's really fascinating essay on the Spanish response to the Latin American boom on page 269 of The Riveter when you have a moment. So my next guest is Teresa Solana. Hello, Teresa. Welcome. Welcome. Teresa is probably the writer who has come from the closest distance for the event today. You live here in the UK, is that correct?
Is that correct? Buona tarda, good afternoon. Yeah, I've been living in the UK for the past 9 years.
Okay, great. So Teresa was the director of the National Translation Center in Spain for 7 years and now devotes her time to writing. A Not So Perfect Crime, her first novel, won the 2007 Brigada 21 Prize for Best Noir in Catalan. And A Shortcut to Paradise, her second, was shortlisted for the 2008 Salambo Prize for the Best Novel in Catalan. And Teresa's novels in English, thus far, have been published by Bitter Lemon Press, and you are starting a new cycle of English translations with Corylus publisher, Corylus Press, which will begin a new cycle with a new detective protagonist.
Yes, in this case is a female detective. In my previous novels, my detectives weren't detectives at all. So, yeah, in this new series, we have a feminist policeman.
A feminist policewoman. I love it. Now, Nick Caster, the translator from Spanish, Nick Caster, did a really, really wonderful feature review of your works published in this magazine. And what he said was that it's often said that thrillers are one of the best ways of commenting on the society they portray. And one of the great pleasures of Solana's trilogy is the way she uses tropes from crime novels to satirize aspects of life in the Catalan capital in the early years of this century. So how has the noir genre allowed you to also sort of play and experiment with, a social or cultural commentary and have some fun with it as well, I think?
Well, the thing, Katie, is that I was the first person surprised when my publisher told me that I had written a noir. Because with my first novel, I thought that I had written a satire on Catalan society. But of course, in the novel, there was a murder, there were these strange private investigators, and she said, no, this is a noir. So I really discovered that noir is a great way to talk about contemporary issues, about the things that I am concerned. Noir and humor, because in my novels and my short stories, there is a lot of humor as well.
Well, and there's some metafiction as well, which I think you're going to be reading for us today, and you appear as a character.
Yeah, well, because I only try to do something a bit different with noir. So in the extract that I'm going to read is a novel called The Hand of One Hand Killing. I suppose that you know that there is a saying, is the sound of one hand clapping. Yeah, and my English publisher had this wonderful idea of putting this title. So yeah, in this case, the author, Teresa Solana, becomes a character of the novel.
Would you mind standing and reading for us?
Sure. First, I'm going to read just the sentence in Catalan so you can sense how Catalan sounds. A primera hora del matí, l'ascensor que agafava l'Eudal Gris per pujar fins al seu despatx podia a una desagradable barreja de colònies masculines. The text, the novel, the extract that I am going to read is being wonderfully translated by Peter Bush. As Borja had been away the whole weekend, we'd not had an opportunity to discuss the peculiar call he'd received on Friday afternoon before leaving for Cadaqués. Borja had been at pains to say it was from a novelist by the name of Teresa Solana, without going into details, although after our unpleasant experience in that Hotel Ritz case, I wasn't at all sure I was in favor of more dealings with the city pen pushers. Good knows what she can want, I snarled. Bah, I expect she will ask us to keep an eye on her husband in case he's having a bit on the side. That's what women are always worrying about. You just see, it will be a doodle, Borja said, seemingly quite sure of that. A few hours spent trailing a guy and money in the bank. It would be a good idea to come out of the meeting with a check, I had to admit. I'm clean out. As it had been weeks since we had any clients and we'd hardly been to the office, we thought it would be a good idea to arrive well in advance, ventilate the space, and spray some of our non-existent secretary's perfume around, as we always do before meeting someone. Our office, which is in Carrer Montaner, near Plaça Bonanova, is very close to Merche's flat on Carrer Balmes that has become Borja's pad, so we walked it. En route, we stopped in a cafe and Borja stuffed his stomach while I had a quick cortado. She must be a strange lady, I said, thinking aloud, referring to her profession, devoting her days to writing about murder. As I discovered from Google search, Teresa Solana wrote noir novels, but neither Borja nor myself had read any. Mariona Castany, who acted as Borja's guardian angel in Barcelona High Society, didn't know who was she either, so that meant she was neither rich nor a member of the most select circles in the city. Nevertheless, as business was bad and we were in no position to be snooty, we decided to give her a go and see if we couldn't lean on her for an advance. We expected that any assignment commissioned by Teresa Solana would be routine and wouldn't involve deaths of murders. "What the hell?" exclaimed Borja, coming out of the lift onto the landing and seeing our office door unlocked and ajar. We immediately identified the problem. Someone had forced the IFI lock we never got round to changing because we kept nothing of value in our office. The burglar had merely levered it open with an iron bar, probably over the weekend, when the concierge isn't around and the building is almost empty. Borja switched the light on in the tiny lobby, and we went into the main room where all our suspicions were confirmed. They had broken in and burglared us. And it was obvious that the thief who had done the job were not disciples of Arsène Lupin, but had done it more in Terminator or Rambo style. "Shit," growled Borja, clicking his tongue. "Why did they have to do it for today? What a disaster. It will cost us a fortune to put this lot right. And in the meantime, Mrs. Solana will be here in a minute," I said, looking at my watch. "We have to think of something. We can see her here, an office that is supposed to pride itself on confidentiality, but that thieves can break into so easily is hardly good publicity in our line of business," I argued. "Quite right. Besides, she sees the doors are fake and that we are only walled behind them." He shook his head again. "Pity about the doors. They cost a fortune." "We should call Mrs. Solana immediately and cancel our meeting on some pretext or other," I said, making a move as if to make my mobile from my pocket. Borja gently took my arm and stopped me. "We need this assignment," he retorted. "It'll be some time before I'm paid for that other business I mentioned before. And in the meantime, we need a cash injection. I am as broke as you are." "We can call her and arrange to meet somewhere else," I suggested. "We can say our office has been flooded." "There is a slight problem. I left my mobile at home and don't have her number," he replied. "We could go downstairs and wait for her in the street. And then what? Take her to a bar and ask her to recount her life story surrounded by total strangers?" "Well, you tell me," I said, glancing around our office. "There is nothing doing here." "Don't worry," Borja replied, grinning at me like a Cheshire cat. "I've just had a brilliant idea." Thank you so much.
Peter Bush. Now, Peter Bush is an award-winning translator from Catalan, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. Peter has translated a number of prominent Catalan writers into English, including the writer we are going to discuss tonight. He has won numerous awards, and I have a big, long list of names and of things to say, but basically, Peter, for those of you in the know, is really an institution in the translation world, especially from his work in Catalan. So we are so delighted to have you here. Thank you. And following up on Teresa's reading, we are going to talk tonight about another Catalan writer who is also acclaimed and who did an incredible job reflecting Catalan society and her own historic moment, and that is Merche Rodoreda. And Merche Rodoreda is considered very widely a classic Catalan writer. And in The Riveter, Marina Porras, who curated part of our Spotlight on Catalan Literature section, writes something really interesting about the reception of Rodoreda's work in English translation. And I'm going to just read that briefly. She writes that with every Rodoreda translation, more readers claim to have made a literary discovery. And my question for you is, what is it about Ruivereta's work that retains this sort of freshness and of novelty and discovery, so that each time that readers are encountering her work, there's a sense of having made some kind of discovery, uncovered a new classic?
I think that this is true about Ruivereta, but I think it's also true about Catalan writing in general. That, I mean, as a translator, when I first started translating Catalan, which was like in 2003, I suddenly read these works, which I had never read before, and thought, you know, why aren't they in English? It was a surprise to me. I started studying Spanish at university in 1964, and you know, these works were not present in the curriculum in Cambridge, where I did my first degree, and they weren't present in many UK universities. And all of a sudden, you know, I found work by Josep Pla, Joan Sales, Uncertain Glory, and Mercè Ruivereta. And I think with Ruivereta, as with some of these other writers, what's astonishing is their originality and the way that their writing develops in all kinds of surprising ways, from novels that may seem fairly kind of conventional realist novels, but then novels of inner monologues, and, well, take In Diamond Square, for instance, which is basically a woman looking back on her life, a working-class woman from the Gracia district in Barcelona, who is young when the Second Republic is voted in. She marries a carpenter, a furniture maker, who goes off and fights in the Civil War. She has 2 children. She finds herself alone on the home front in Barcelona, trying to preserve her 2 children and herself. And I think that's another aspect of the writing of these great Catalan classics like Ruivereta, is that they're writing something that is very Catalan, but it is also very universal. When I was translating In Diamond Square, I was thinking of, you know, the great kind of Russian novels about the siege of Stalingrad. So there is that Catalan woman in Barcelona in 1937-38, trying to survive with her children, as my mother tried to survive with her 2 daughters during the whole of the Second World War when her husband was away in the war, or how all those people in Stalingrad had to kind of struggle to exist. Yeah.
So there's a universality.
I think so, and I translated a prologue that Ruivereta had written to a school edition of In Diamond Square, and it's interesting because she talks about how pleased she is that in Diamond Square, this square in Gracia, has now become known throughout the world through translation. But at the same time, she's talking about her heroine, Colometa, who I call Pidgey, in terms of Anna Karenina, and her novel techniques in terms of Robbe-Grillet, Balzac, and Flaubert. In other words, she herself had a very broad conception of herself as a writer who was part of that European narrative, classic narrative.
Thank you, Peter. Would you read for us?
Yeah, sure. So this is the Spanish Revolution. The Spanish Civil War is just beginning. We're in Barcelona. And while I was waging my big revolution against the pigeons, what was brewing came. but they said would be a 2-day wonder. The gas went. I mean, it didn't reach the flat or the underground rooms in the house I cleaned. The first day we had to cook lunch on the balcony in a grey earthenware pot hung on a black iron frame with home oak charcoal I had to fetch, and me on my last legs. That's the last there is, said the charcoal woman, because her husband had taken to the streets. Joe was also running around on the streets, and every day I'd think that that would be the last I'd see of him. He put on a blue boiler suit, and after several days of smoke and churches in flames, he walked in with a revolver in his belt and a double-barreled shotgun over his shoulder. And it was so hot, so blistering hot. The clothes stuck to your back, and the materials stuck to your whole body, and people were very scared. The grocers downstairs were soon cleaned out, and no one could talk about anything else. And one lady said, you could see it coming a long time ago. And people also took up arms in the summer, which is when the blood comes to the boil the quickest. And you know, even Africa, where it's always hottest, must have melted down this time. One day, when the Sealer Company milk delivery was due, it didn't arrive. And my employers sat in their dining room waiting for their Sealer milk to be delivered. And at 12, someone rang the front door, and they told me to go up and open up, with the gentleman in the house coat behind me. I opened the grill, and the man handed me 2 shiny containers. And the gentleman in the house coat said, you do see what's happening, don't you? What do you reckon? Can't they see the poor can't survive without the rich? And the Sealer milkman lowered the cover over his cart and asked the gentleman if he wouldn't mind paying. They paid by the week usually, because he wasn't sure he'd be able to bring any milk in the morning. Madame came upstairs, listened to him, and asked what they'd done to their cows. She said she didn't think the cows had joined the revolution. And the milkman said, no, madam, I don't think so. But everybody has taken to the streets, and we'll close down. And how will we make do without milk? Asked Madame. And the gentleman butted in and said, when the workers want to act like the boss, they don't know how. What about you, sir? Do you want the revolution? No, sir, replied the milkman. And he was already pushing his cart up the road and had forgotten that they were supposed to pay him. And the gentleman called him back and paid him and said he was obviously a good man, even though he was a worker. And the milkman said, I'm past all this. And he pushed his cart off up the street, knocking on doors to finish delivering his last litres of milk. I shut the grill, and the daughter of the house was waiting for us at the foot of the winding stairs. And Madame, her mother, said, he said there'd be no more milk from tomorrow. And her daughter replied, how will we ever manage? We all sat down in the dining room, and the gentleman told me that he listened to the crystal set every night, and everything would soon be put to rights because they were on the way up the country. And the next morning, as soon as I pulled the chain on the door and set foot on the first step covered in dry, soft jasmine blossom, I saw Madame waiting for me next to the mimosa. Little beads of sweat were streaming down her face, and she stood still. They almost killed my husband last night. Who did? I replied. And she said, let's go into the dining room where it's cooler. As soon as we'd sat down on the wicker armchair, she said, at 8 o'clock last night, the time my husband always comes back from the office, we heard him shout in the lobby, come here, come up here. I went up, and a militiaman was standing behind him, poking a shotgun in his back. Why? I asked. You just wait, she said with a laugh. They'd mistaken him for a priest, as he's bald on top. The militiaman thought he'd cut off his hair as a disguise, and he'd walked him like that from Travesera, his gun poking into my husband's back. My husband said the militiaman was arresting him, and he'd had a hard time persuading him to bring him home to see his family. I flushed red for a moment because I was scared the militiaman might have been my hothead Joe, but then I remembered that Madame knew him. But I was scared for a second. And Madame said she told the militiaman they'd been married for 22 years, and he went off saying he was sorry. And she said every night they were glued to the crystal set, and her son-in-law, the gentleman in the housecoat, wouldn't let anyone else use the earphones while he listened, looking very anxious, and he said he couldn't hear anything tonight. 2 days after the militia incident, somebody rang at the door at 3 o'clock. The lady went to open the door and said that the moment she started walking down the marble steps in the lobby, she had a real fright, almost had a heart attack, because she could make out a big group of people and the shadowy outline of sticks, which were gun barrels, through the bubbly, frosted glass.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter. My next guest is Karmele Jaio. Karmele is the Euskadi Literature Prize-winning author of 3 books of short stories and 2 novels. Her short stories have also been published in numerous anthologies, including the Best European Fiction 2017 and the Penguin Book of Spanish Short Stories, put out by Penguin Classics. Her Mother's Hands was translated by Kristen Addis and published by Parthian. And My Father's House is forthcoming from Daedalus Books this summer in a translation from Margaret Julcosta and Sophie Hughes. Welcome, Karmele.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Excellent.
So, Her Mother's Hands, would you tell us the name of that novel in Basque so we can hear?
The name in Basque is Amaren Eskuak.
Thank you. I think there might be people in the audience who have not heard Basque spoken, so thank you. So, Her Mother's Hands was published in 2008, and it remains one of the best-selling books in the Basque language year after year. And a really fun fact that I found was that during the lockdown, during the COVID pandemic, it was one of the most, if not the most, borrowed book in the Basque public digital library system. So what do you think about that?
Well, I'm so happy about that.
Yes.
Yes, it's true that it was my first novel. And it's true that for the beginning, it had a very good reception from Basque readers.
Basque readers.
First Basque readers, then Spanish readers. Because I think that it's a story that is located in the Basque country, but I write or I talk, I speak about the universal themes, no? And in this case, about relationships, about family, about the silence, especially the unspoken words in our relationships. No, and I think that's very universal. No, especially in families, the silences in the families. How maybe we can live together a lot of years, and maybe we can be still strangers. No?
And how that silence is sort of transmitted from one generation to the next.
Yes.
And, you know, it strikes me that, as you say, that this is something that happens in sort of the insular world of a family, but it also happens throughout societies and cultures and communities. And that it strikes me that could also be something in a Basque context that is very interesting. The idea of, you know, the stories that we tell or don't tell to ourselves and each other.
Yeah. That's why in all the things, in all the books I write, for me always is more important what the characters don't say.
Yes.
More than what they say, no? Because I think that in real life also we hide, or we don't show, or we don't say everything. The most important things, you know, we don't say. So for me, the most important thing when I'm writing, I'm trying to show these unspoken words. No?
So you self-translated this novel into Castilian Spanish for its publication in the Spanish edition. And is that something that's quite common among Basque writers to get their work in Castilian? They do a self-translation. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it's very common because we live in both languages, no? And in my case, I need to translate it myself because I live in the two languages. I speak every day the two languages, and I express myself different in Spanish or in Basque because they're very different languages. So when I translate, I need to rewrite. I need to write it in Spanish, and I think this is a good exercise because you know better how you write when you translate yourself. You see your writing like in a mirror. No? There's a Basque writer, Arcaitzcano. He says that when you translate your own work, it's like when you go to the hairdresser and they put behind the mirror,
Yes.
and you see your back.
You say, wow,
And
that's
you
me.
say, oh, that's me. So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
don't know your back, no? And it's the same.
That's
You
a
are
beautiful image.
translating yourself, and you see things that you don't see while you are writing. No?
Yeah, I really love that. Well, we would love to hear you read from Kristen Addis's translation of Her Mother's Hands from the Basque.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, I want to read some lines, only some lines of in Basque for the sound. There's the beginning of a poem. It's Gozari Astarnak is the title. Ez dira domeketako pagak, ez dira marrazki bizidunak, parkeko jolasak, edo benetako lagunak faltan sentitzen ditudanak. Goizero nire Espainetako gozari aztarnak, txistuaz bustitako zapiarekin, garbituko dituen norbait, oraindik badela jakitea da, benetan falta zaidana. So now I'm going to read 3 little extracts from my mother's house, or my mother's hand, sorry, translated by Kristen Addis. In this first extract, Nerea's mother is in the hospital. She doesn't remember anything. She doesn't even recognize her daughter. And Nerea has taken some photographs to the hospital to make her remember. When Nerea sees herself in the photograph from the beach, it brings back the smell of the summers she spent at the seaside as a child. She smells the cream her mother used to put on her, feels the slide of her mother's hand putting it on her back. She remembers her father lying under the beach umbrella or walking along the water's edge, while her mother lay in the hammock. Like today, her mother is lying down today as well, right in front of her, but in a hospital bed, not a hammock. The old photo she brought to show her mother is in her purse, and she sits without moving in the white hospital chair, looking at her mother's hands. Her mother's hands rest on top of the sheet, without moving, as if made of stone, as if the blood in her veins has turned to stagnant water. Her hands cover the name of the hospital, as if she wanted to hide where she is, as if even in her sleep, she were trying not to worry anyone. The next 2 extracts refer to memory. Sometimes we forget who we are, who we have been, but life gives us a shock, and suddenly we remember. That is what her aunt Dolores, is trying to explain to Nerea with these words. A similar thing happens when you paint an old wardrobe, for example. Think about what happens when you put a new coat of paint over the old one on a wardrobe.
Brown paint over white, for example. Well, after a while, you think the wardrobe was always brown. You forget that it was ever white. But over the years, the wardrobe suffers from humidity, heat, cold, the touches of many hands, and because of all these things, a piece of the top layer flakes off. A little piece of paint flakes off, and under the brown, you see that the wardrobe has a white coat. At first, you are surprised, but then you say, that's right, it's true. This wardrobe was white once. This is what happens with us too. We repaint ourselves endlessly, putting one event on top of another, forgetting the one underneath or thinking that we've forgotten. But one day we take a hit, and just like the wardrobe, little pieces of the top layer fall to the ground, and other layers can then be seen, earlier ones. And then we say, yes, that's right, this wardrobe was white once. And the last one, the last extract is also about memory, and this is how Nerea talks about her aunt's eyes, about the eyes of people who migrate to other countries. Aunt Dolores' eyes never get old, because while she's been living in Germany, her eyes have been in the land of her birth, awaiting her return. Nerea thinks that only the eyes of those who stay in their native land get old, those that see their surrounding changing every day, like her mother's eyes. The eyes of people who leave their homeland, however, stay in the land of their birth and barely get older at all while they are far from the body. Hence the sparkle in her aunt's eyes. While she was living in Germany, her eyes were here, waiting for her. Thank you very much. Eskerrik asko.
Thank you, Karmele. That was beautiful. Well, my next guest is Xesús Fraga. And Xesús is a writer from Galicia. He writes in Gallego. He's also a translator of many wonderful writers in English, such as your dear friend Julian Barnes. One really wonderful thing about Xesús and his presence here tonight is that it is a bit of a homecoming for you. Is that right? Were you?
Yes, it is.
You were born in London.
Yes, at St. Mary Abbott's Hospital, not a hospital anymore. I'm sorry.
Yes. So there's a passage in your novel, Virtues, which has been translated as Virtues and Mysteries. I should say that the sample translation is entitled Virtues and Mysteries because this amazing book, which won Spain's National Prize for Narrative in 2021, and is one of only a handful of novels originally written in Galician to have won that award, is still seeking a publisher. So I just want to note that. But there's a beautiful passage towards the end of the book where you describe the writing of this memoir novel. They call it a novel, but it's the story of your family, as sort of an exercise of imagining an ex-future. And I really love that, and I want to know if you're living an ex-future moment right now as a writer reading your work in the British Library. What would it have been like if your family had stayed in London and not gone back to Galicia? Maybe you would be here in an alternate timeline anyway. Is that something that you've kind of thought about on this trip?
Yes, that was the beginning of the novel, or the memoir. What kind of life would I have led if I had stayed in London instead of going back to Galicia when I was 5, after living here my first 5 years of my life? It's like in the Robert Frost poem, The Road Not Taken. You get to a crossroads and you have to choose. And sometimes that choice, you don't get to do it. It gets enforced on you. And that's what happened when I was 5. So you go along a path, but that doesn't mean that a ghost your ghost, one of your ghosts of what you may have become, goes along the other path. And that's your future, the person you could have been in the future. And in some ways, I feel that when I come to London, I have encounters with the ghost of my 5-year-old self, who's still living as a ghost in Fulham, in Elscourt, in Kensington, or whatever the place we lived. We moved quite a lot.
There's a really lovely quote from a review of this work in El País, and I'm going to read that, and then I'm going to ask for your comment. So the quote reads: this is in effect the story of Fraga's family, but above all the story of the women in that family. His grandmother, whom the book is named after, and whose mysteries make up much of the plot, and his mother. And beyond that, it is also the story of Galician immigration, and of Spain as a whole. And I think that's, kind of a tall order for one book. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is Galicia's story also the story of immigration?
Yes, we Galicians, as the Irish, have been migrating since the 19th century. And for instance, in Argentina, they call all Spaniards Gallegos, because nearly all the Spaniards there were Galicians. So what I wanted to do was to write the story of my family the best way I could, bearing in mind my limited possibilities and my limited talent as a writer. I didn't want to do, a kind of essay or pack everything in it. I thought that, well, maybe this story can be universal and can reflect migration, because my grandmother came to the UK because her husband, my grandfather, went to Venezuela. He was a cobbler, he was poor, and he said, okay, in 5 or 6 years in Venezuela, I'll get rich. There's oil, there's industry, there are loads of opportunities, so I'll come back and I'll be rich. And in 5 years, he hadn't sent a single penny. He didn't want to come back. He didn't want my grandmother to go there. So my grandmother said, okay, he's got another family, better forget him, because he didn't even answer her letters. And she came here to the UK. She left her 3 daughters behind. She came to a place where she didn't know a single word of English, though I can warn you now, she was very, very fluent in swear words and very foul-mouthed. This is a warning. And she was able, with hard work, to support her family. So that's the story.
Well, on that note, and with that perfect introduction, would you read to us from Jacob Rogers' sample translation of Virtues and Mysteries?
Okay, as Karmele did, I'll read a couple of sentences in Galician so you can get a feel of it. And it's from the first chapter. Unha aboa e o seu neto. Cando a aboa se anoxaba, acendíaselle un brillo de fereza nos ollos e apertaba os dentes nun aceno severo que lle tiraba do queixo para arriba e lle tensaba as engurras. A min lembrábame un bulldog, a espreita da túa debilidade, do teu erro. So, in Jacob Rogers' translation, it sounds like this. Grandmother and grandson. Anytime my grandmother got angry, her eyes would flash with a feral gleam, and she would clench her teeth in a grim rictus, lips pursed, jaw quaking. She reminded me in these moments of a bulldog sniffing out your slightest weakness, your slightest misstep. She would crouch into a squat and eye you from this low vantage point, which rather than undermine her authority, was a clear sign she was primed to attack. When my grandmother got angry with me, it was almost always because I'd either questioned her infallible opinions or because some problem had arisen which, according to her, was my fault, but which, from my perspective, was purely a misunderstanding. She didn't care what I had to say, but in a way my defenses with an unmatchable argument. This is wrong. The angriest she's ever been with me, the nearest I've ever felt the bulldog's fangs to my face, was one morning outside her flat in London. We were on our way to the airport to catch the flight to Galicia and had lugged our suitcases down to the vestibule. I'm going to see if I can find a taxi at High Street, Kensington. You stay here with our things. Take care, she had ordained, before opening the door and descending the steps down to the pavement, still deserted and lit by the feeble yellow of the street lamps at these early hours of the morning. Watching her walk in the direction of the faint murmur of traffic from the main road, I felt a sudden, irrepressible urge to follow her. To this day, I still don't know why I acted on it. Maybe it was an impulsive, childish fear of being left alone. Whatever the case, I rushed down the 5 steps separating the pavement from the front door, which I'd made sure to shut. I guess out of some instinct not to leave our belongings unattended. Hey, wait, I'm coming with you. My grandmother had already set off walking and didn't hear me. I nearly had to run to catch up. She couldn't have been more incredulous when she saw me. What are you doing here? What if the door shuts? Don't you see I've let my keys back in the purse inside? I confessed that the door had already been shut, though I neglected to mention that I was the culprit. Predictably, her incredulity turned to rage, followed by a litany of vehement curses, which I immediately set to work repressing. Any attempt to reproduce them here would be an exercise in memory, and exercises in memory are always more of a reinvention than a retelling. And anyway, I'd never be able to do the experience justice. Things weren't looking good for us. Stuck outside my grandmother's building at 4 a.m. with no key, and all of our bags inside. The only bright spot was that thanks to my grandmother's perennial insistence on arriving 3 or 4 hours before takeoff, we still had loads of time. As was her custom, as soon as my grandmother had finished discharging her anger, she solved the problem. She rang the bell for the housekeeper, as she called the housekeeper, in masculine, who lived in the street-level flat. After a few minutes, he finally picked his black face grumpily out from behind the curtains. He was even grumpier when he came out and opened the front door, returning us to the security of the vestibule and the relieving sight of our luggage. I let out a silent sigh of relief, while my grandmother placated him with a self-interested, albeit accurate, version of events. My grandson, he go outside, no keys, and he closed the door. He's estúpido, es un estúpido, crazy. Have I mentioned yet that this is an exercise in memory? These castigations were but of one of the many and varied manifestations of my grandmother's famous temper. If you showed any signs of lollygagging or simply couldn't keep up with her, she would unleash the full force of her wrath upon you, no exceptions. Another part of the humor for us was in how odd her expressions sounded to our young ears. Having grown up in a predominantly Spanish-speaking milieu, we couldn't help but simultaneously be fascinated and amused by her old-fashioned sounding Galician. And then there was her repertoire of composite words. Between her vehemence and our never having heard these words before, we always assumed she'd simply made them up. You've got to esmachucalo, she would say, doubling the impact that the Galician esmagar or the Spanish machucar, to crush, in both cases, would have on their own. Not to mention the ferocious refrains that left us equally tittering and terrified. Only God knows the hardships that women went through, like a whore at Lent. 25 years in London, which she was already well into by the time we were kids, hadn't stopped the setting and the stratum of her formerly rural life from cropping up occasionally in her speech. And she still used old phrases from back then. It's like Korea out here. she would to say as a catch-all for a negative sort of surprise, which reinforced her natural expressiveness. Her phonetic adaptations of places' names in the British capital, Edgware Road was Edward Row, and Hammersmith was Jaime Smith, like a Spanish name, also colored her British Galician, but nothing was as liable to send us into an uncontrollable fit of laughter as her awe-inspiring, high-powered collision of curse words. Fucking merda. My grandmother's fault, sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Xesús. Thank you. Our next guest is the translator Frank Wynne, who is a well-known and very celebrated Irish translator of Spanish and French. Last year, in 2022, he was the chair of the International Booker Prize jury. And this year, he is shortlisted with his translation of Standing Heavy by, can you please pronounce? Gauss. By Gauss. So he's shortlisted this year, and he has informed me earlier that he is going to win next year. So.
Yeah, no, I don't need to win this year. I'm going to win next year instead, if that's okay with everybody else.
So Frank is here joining us tonight to read from his translation of Almudena Grandes, The Frozen Heart, El Corazón Helado. Grandes is one of contemporary Spanish literature's most renowned and in many ways beloved writers. She passed away in November of 2021. And so, Frank, without further ado, would you like to say a few words about the passage or about the novel?
I'd like to say a few words and then I'll go. The literature of the Spanish Civil War is something that comes very late to Spain. Javier Cercas, who I have also had the privilege to translate, says that in the wake of Franco's death, there was a pact of silence. Basically, the only way to transition to some form of democracy was not to spend time blaming each other for everything that had gone on. And so this indeed is what happened, and an entire generation went by during which nobody acknowledged that the Spanish Civil War had ever existed. It was as though there'd been a brief holiday camp under Franco, a bit like Butlins, and then you woke up one day and you had a king again. And there is a lovely, I want to quote this in the Spanish if I can find it right. They only invited me here yesterday. The way in which Almudena herself introduces this. And El Corazón Helado comes midway through her career. It is an enormous novel. I mean, it is 900 pages in Spanish. It spans 50-odd years and 4 generations and more love affairs, more deaths, more entanglements. And as, being Irish and familiar, therefore, with civil wars, it is one of those things where families are divided, come together to be divided again. But the epigraph to the beginning of the book, which comes from a Spanish exile, María Teresa León, begins, "Estoy cansada de no saber dónde morirme. Esa es la mayor tristeza del emigrado. ¿Qué tenemos nosotros que ver con los cementerios de los países donde vivimos?" This is the call of those who, in the wake of the Civil War, were exiled or forced abroad. And Almudena explores this from both sides. So we're taking, at the moment, the side of the family. I mean, it begins brilliantly. This is like Succession. Why Spanish television has not made this, I don't understand. We begin, picture it, a cemetery, lots of short, pudgy women with very bad skirts and stockings that come below their knees. Don't ask me why, but that's how it goes. A billionaire is being buried. And into this drifts an extraordinarily beautiful woman that nobody knows. She is about to put a bomb under their lives that none of them will ever forget. One among them is Ignacio Fernandez Munoz. So, this is part of his story. Ignacio Fernandez Munoz had joined the communists because he wanted to win the war. He joined instinctively, intuitively, for a very different reason to his brother Mateo, who had come to socialism through books. He had volunteered for the Quinto Regimiento. He was proud that they accepted him because they didn't take everyone. The Quinto Regimiento recruited only soldiers, real men, men like Ignacio Fernandez Munoz, who knew what they wanted. And when he joined the Quinto Regimiento, he felt at home. Other regiments discussed orders, voted on them, refused to submit to army discipline, but not the Quinto Regimiento. He served under Modesto, was so dazzled by the man's courage, his authority, his sang-froid, that he became a communist just to be more like him, to serve under more men like him, men who were prepared to do anything to win the war, who never stopped, never tired, never complained. And he fought. When he was 18, when he was 19, 20, 21, he fought to win with those determined to win, men who screamed as he did in silence in the dank prison cell of Puerta del Sol. When he heard his name, he thought he was about to be executed, finally. But he didn't care. Your brother-in-law's got balls, you know. I mean, for a guy who works behind the desk, said the soldier who dragged him from the cell. I mean, from what I heard, he's got the general he works for wrapped around his little finger. He's been asking a lot about you. He looked round at his comrades and winked. Then again, maybe you look a bit like his sister. They laughed. He didn't care. So, I'm free to go? He asked. No way, you think you're free? You were a captain by the time you were 20. You liked giving orders, you liked getting promoted and bossing other people around. So they put him in another cell, with the big shots, they told him. There were no big shots in the cell. Only his friend Vicente Dalmases, who had recently been promoted to captain and posted to El Pardo, and a couple of men he didn't know, lone men who were shattered, crushed, empty inside. The officer who worked the morning shift never spoke to them. The night guard, Rogelio, was a union man. He gave them cigarettes because Ignacio realized he couldn't bear to see them locked up. They're transferring you all to a jail in Puglia tomorrow, he said one night. Don't do this to me, Rogelio. Ignacio clutched the bars and looked into the man's eyes. You kill me. I'd rather be killed by you than Franco. Shoot me, get one of your comrades to shoot me, but not Franco, Rogelio. Don't hand us over to them. Don't let them take us alive. You do it, or give me your gun and I'll shoot myself right now. And he would happily have killed himself. He didn't care. But Rogelio was staring at him in silence, his eyes filled with tears. He walked away, then came back almost immediately, quietly opened the door to the cell, then closed it, making it look as though it was still locked. Wait 20 minutes, he said, then make a run for it. There are guns in the cabinet in the hall. I've left it unlocked. Get rid of your badges. Don't tell anyone that you know that you're communists. He dropped his voice to a whisper, his face close to Ignacio's. There are usually trucks in Las Vistillas about this time. Ignacio didn't thank him. It was something he would never forgive himself for, but it was all so fast, so sad, so somber. And he was no longer himself, no longer capable of feeling anything, caring about anything, believing in anything. But he was capable of stealing a truck. Capable of creeping up on a driver like some furtive, vicious predator, some animal without scruple. Hands up! It was his turn now to say words, and he remembered Facundo and his captain who had been killed. The truck driver made a sudden movement, and Ignacio killed him. He didn't care because this was not a man anymore. He did not think, did not believe, did not feel. But 3 years later, in the pantry of a house in Toulouse, there was a bed, and by his side a slight woman with black hair and large black eyes as beautiful as her hands, as her body, as the face she now lifted from his chest. What's the matter, Ignacio? Why are you crying? He gazed at her with a love he had never felt before, a love that had budded inside the stone that simply rolled among other stones, a stone that did not think, did not feel, did not believe in anything, until it found a love that made it possible for him to be reborn. To be a man again. I killed a man, Anita. Just one? You killed a lot of men, didn't you? No. The war killed the rest of them. But I was the one who killed the anarchist. I killed him because I wanted to. My life had been saved twice. First by Carlos, my brother-in-law, then by a socialist named Rogelio. They saved my life, and I never thanked them, and I couldn't bring myself to forgive that man. And maybe that's the only reason I'm here. Maybe he would have killed me. He did something with his hands. I don't know if he was armed. I mean, there was a pistol in his jacket, and I saw it after he fell, but maybe he would have killed me, but I'll never know because I shot him. They had betrayed us. They were murdering us, and so I hated him. Even though I didn't know him, I aimed at his head, and I killed him, and I couldn't bring myself to spare his life. Don't cry, Ignacio. Anita pressed herself against him, comforted him, using the same words his granddaughter Raquel would use many years later before promising never to tell her grandmother, "Don't cry. Please don't cry." It was warm in that field in Albatera in mid-May, but Ignacio's blood froze in his veins as he watched his brother Mateo climb into a truck, turn, look for him, and then seeing him bring the hand that was not handcuffed to his lips, kiss the palm gently, and turn it towards him to say goodbye. It was in that moment that Ignacio Fernandez Muñoz realized that his heart was broken and that it was no longer a human heart.
Thank you, Frank. So our last guest is Rosa Montero. We are so lucky to have her with us here tonight. Rosa is an award-winning journalist, author, columnist, interviewer, and she is, to my mind, one of the most important contemporary writers in Spanish. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. Now, first I want to say that I'm delighted to be here in this wonderful British Library and with all of you. Thank you for coming. And I'm very grateful with this wonderful Riveter magazine. I think that is a wonderful thing that you have done. So thank you very much, Rosie and Katie and all of you. An applause to them. Yeah.
Thank you, Rosa.
It's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we are so lucky to have you here tonight. Now, we're like right at the end, which is so frustrating because I know from earlier in the afternoon that you and I could talk during for hours and hours and hours.
I'm afraid,
and so we have actually recorded an interview, Rosa and I, and that will be available for more Rosa and Katie content on the Elnet website. So there'll be more. I want to get into your reading. This is from El Peligro de Estar Cuerda, which Lilith Thwaites has translated as The Danger of Being Sane. And it's one of your most recent works, and it is a hybrid work. It's memoir, essay, autobiography. There's quite a bit of science involved in this as well.
It's a very, very difficult to describe, this book, and it's a biography of other people too and all that, and it talks about the relationship between madness and creativity, that it has been a subject very old. Even Aristotle has talked about that. And then it talks also about what we call madness, what we call to be sane and to be insane, what we call reality, because reality, in fact, is a social and cultural construction. I don't trust reality at all. I have had from 16 years old till 30 years old panic attacks, and I went out from reality, so I don't trust. And even, actually, we live in a mirage. You know, I'm not only going to say this. You know that in the middle of our eyes, there is a blind spot where the optic nerve inserts into the retina, the eye doesn't see at all, it's blind. And it's not a small hole, it's a huge hole that measures between 2 degrees and 4 degrees of the visual arc. And the moon measures half a degree. So imagine what a big hole of blindness that we have. But look to the left, to the right, look to the left, we don't see the black hole because the brain invents, creates what we don't see. So we actually live in a mirage. So reality is not stressful. I talk about that in the
now
book.
we can end. Thank you all for coming. So, Rosa, would you please, is this from the very beginning of the book?
The very beginning. I
Okay,
will.
thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Yeah, is as we have said, is The Danger of Being Sane, and the translator is Lily Twites. And every chapter has a title, and this has this title, Leaking Copper. I've always known that something inside my head wasn't right. When I was 6 or 7, every night before falling asleep, I'd ask my mother to hide a small ornament we had in the house, a horrendous little copper cooking pot, a typical item found in cheap souvenir shops, or maybe even a gift from a restaurant. I asked her to do it, not because the ugliness of the pot made me uncomfortable. That might have seemed a bit odd, but in a sense, discerning. But because I'd read somewhere that copper was poisonous, and I was afraid that I'd sleepwalk in the middle of the night and start leaking the pot. I don't really know how such an idea could have come to me, added to which I've never been a sleepwalker. Even back then, it struck me as a little weird. But that didn't stop me from being able to visualize myself quite clearly running my tongue up and down the metal. And terrified as a result, actually asking my mother to please, please, please keep hiding the object in some out-of-the-way spot, a different place each time if she could, so it would be impossible for me to find it. My imagination, as you can see, has always had a mind of its own. And my wonderful mother agreed gravely and promised to hide the pot really well. She magically understood children, and moreover, now I think it likely that similar things occurred to her when she was little, because she also had a flighty mind. To top it all, as an adult, I found out that copper isn't toxic. It's not even very poisonous. It can be harmful, of course, but only in large, prolonged doses, and the early symptoms are little more than diarrhea and nausea. I could have sucked that wretched pot for a long time without anything occurring. This sort of thing happens very often. You get older, and one day you suddenly find out that something you firmly believed as a child is not true or is nonsense. Life is a constant rewriting of yesterday, a deconstruction of childhood. One of the good things I have discovered over time is that being weird is not at all unusual, despite what the word seems to suggest. In point of fact, what is really rare is to be normal. Research carried out in the Department of Psychology at Yale University in Connecticut and published in 2018 confirms something which, if you think about it, is self-evident. Normality doesn't exist, because the notion of normal is a statistical construction derived by obtaining the media from a range of very different values. To start with, the fact that something is less frequent doesn't imply a pathological abnormality. Take, for example, being left-handed. Only between 10 and 70% of the world's population are left-handed. In addition, since the ideal model of a normal individual is constructed as the average of several characteristics, there are not to be a single person on the planet who scores exactly the average in all the values. Deep in our hearts, we all hide some divergence. We are all weird beings, although clearly some of us are more peculiar than others. I would even say that being a little bit stranger than usual is not uncommon either. In fact, it often crops up in people who are creative in the widest sense of the word, among artists of every sort, good or bad. That's precisely what this book is about, the relationship between creativity and a certain eccentricity. It explores the idea that creativity has something to do with delusion. If being an artist makes you more prone to mental instability, as has been suspected since the beginning of time. There is no great genius without some touch of madness, said Seneca. And Diderot, oh, how near are genius and madness. That's all.
Thank you, Rosa. And thank you to all of you. Thank you to Rosie, who is now coming up to relieve me, I believe.
You can stay put and listen to all the praise, I think.
Uh-oh.
I mean, actually, when you prepare events like this, you always hope they're going to be good. But this has absolutely exceeded all my expectations. This was absolutely wonderful. We could go on all evening, as you know. We have so many other things we can read to you, but it's all in there, and all the authors and the translators are in there as well. Now, make sure you pick up your copies of The Spanish Riveter, and I think there are some Austrian riveters as well around which you can take with you, which we launched last week, also at the British Library. They're all free, and they're not only in print, but they're also available as PDFs online on the website of the European Literature Network, as are all our Riveter magazines. Now, if you know anyone who'd like to order copies to be posted to them, we also have an arrangement with Newsstand UK, and all they have to pay is the postage and the packaging, so you'd have to go online for that as well. We also have a booksellers tonight, Housemans at the back, so please buy the books. It's really important. Read the books, buy the books, and of course the authors and translators are here to sign them. In addition, we have a special selection dedicated to Spanish literature on the European Literature Network section of the online bookshop, bookshop.org, which is fantastic. Again, it's a great resource. And finally, the next big date for your diaries is the first ever European Writers' Festival here at the British Library, taking place on the 20th and 21st of May. So please come, and thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight and for celebrating with us this wonderful magazine. We're all so proud of it, The Spanish Riveter. Thank you, Katie. Thanks.